I never thought I'd find myself in such a tangled web of confusion and heartache. It all started innocently enough. My wife, Laura, and I had been married for 12 years. We had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? We had 2 beautiful kids, a comfortable home, and what I thought was a stable relationship. Looking back now, I see the cracks that I missed, the subtle signs that something was deeply wrong. Laura was always close to her family, especially her brother, Mike. They shared a bond that seemed unbreakable, forged through a difficult childhood. Their parents had divorced when they were young, and they had leaned on each other ever since. I admired their closeness. It was one of the things that drew me to Laura in the first place. She was fiercely loyal to those she loved. Mike was a regular fixture in our home. He was good with the kids, always ready to lend a hand, and often stayed for dinner. I never thought twice about his frequent visits. He was family, and family was always welcome. Life went on as usual, or so I thought. Our routine was predictable, comforting even. I worked long hours at my job as an architect, and Laura managed the household and worked part-time at a local boutique. Our weekends were filled with soccer games, family barbecues, and movie nights with the kids. It was the kind of life I had always envisioned. But then, small changes began to creep in. Laura started spending more time on her phone, often disappearing into another room to take calls or send texts. When I asked who she was talking to, she would just smile and say it was a friend from work. I didn't think much of it. Everyone needs their own space, their own friends. Mike, too, seemed to be around more often. Not that I minded. He was great with the kids and always helped out around the house. But there were moments when I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an outsider looking in on their little world. They had inside jokes, shared glances, and a bond that, while understandable, sometimes made me feel left out. One night, as we sat around the dinner table, Laura mentioned she and Mike were planning a weekend trip to visit some old family friends. It struck me as odd. Why hadn't I heard about these friends before, and why wasn't I invited? But I didn't say anything. I trusted Laura and Mike implicitly. They were family, and family sticks together. As the weeks passed, I noticed Laura growing more distant. She was preoccupied, often lost in thought. Our conversations became more superficial, revolving around the kids or household chores. Intimacy dwindled, replaced by a polite but distant camaraderie. I told myself it was just a phase, a rough patch we would get through. Every marriage has them, right? The kids started to pick up on the tension. Our eldest, Emma, asked me one night if Mom was mad at me. My heart sank. I reassured her that everything was fine, but deep down, I knew things were far from okay. I felt like I was losing Laura, and I didn't know how to reach her. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to an empty house. Laura had taken the kids to her mother's for the weekend, a trip she hadn't mentioned until the last minute. As I wandered through the quiet rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The house felt cold, empty, and lifeless. But as I sat alone in the silence of our home, I couldn't help but wonder, was it too late? Had I already lost the woman I loved? The uncertainty gnawed at me, and I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed answers, and I was willing to face whatever truths I uncovered, no matter how painful they might be. When Laura and the kids returned, I was determined to reconnect. I planned a special dinner, just the 2 of us, hoping to bridge the growing gap. Laura seemed genuinely pleased by the gesture, and for a while it felt like old times. We laughed, reminisced about when we first met, and talked about the kids. It was a brief respite, a glimmer of hope that maybe we could find our way back to each other. But the next day, Laura was back to being distant. She had long phone conversations behind closed doors, and her excuses about who she was talking to became increasingly vague. I could see the worry in Emma's eyes and the confusion in our younger son, Jack. They sensed the tension, and it was affecting them. One evening, as I was tucking Jack into bed, he asked, "Dad, is Mom mad at you?" His innocent question cut deep. I forced a smile and assured him everything was fine, but his words lingered in my mind. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. I was working in the yard, trying to distract myself from the gnawing anxiety. Laura was inside, supposedly cleaning, but I noticed Mike's car pull up. My heart sank. He hadn't mentioned he was coming over, and something about the way he quickly entered the house set off alarm bells. I walked in to find them sitting too close on the couch, their conversation abruptly stopping as I entered. They both looked up, surprised, as if caught off guard. "Hey, didn't expect to see you here," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Mike stammered something about dropping by to help with some household repairs, but his explanation felt forced. That night, after Mike left, I confronted Laura. "What's going on with you and Mike?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked at me, startled. "What do you mean? There's nothing going on." "Don't lie to me, Laura. I've seen how you two are around each other. Something's changed." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "You're imagining things, Tom. Mike's just been helping out more because he knows we've been going through a tough time." I wanted to believe her, but the doubt was too strong. "I don't buy it. You've been distant, secretive. I need to know the truth." She broke down then, sobbing. "I'm sorry, Tom. I'm so sorry." But before I could press for more, she ran to our bedroom, locking the door behind her. I started paying closer attention to Laura's behavior, noting every phone call and every unexplained outing. I became obsessed, driven by a need to uncover the truth. It felt like I was living a double life, pretending everything was fine for the sake of the kids while secretly investigating my own wife. One evening, while Laura was out running errands, I decided to check her computer. It was a desperate move, but I was out of options. I searched through her emails and social media accounts, finding nothing incriminating. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a folder hidden deep within her files. It was password protected, but I managed to guess the password after a few tries. My heart pounded as the folder opened, revealing a series of messages and photos that made my blood run cold. The messages were between Laura and Mike. They were filled with declarations of love and detailed plans for their future together. My hands shook as I scrolled through the photos. Pictures of them together in intimate settings, their expressions filled with a happiness that had been missing from our marriage for a long time. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The betrayal was so deep, so personal, that I felt physically ill. I had been right all along, but the confirmation was more painful than I could have imagined. My wife, the mother of my children, was having an affair with her own brother. I printed out the messages and photos, needing tangible proof of their betrayal. As I held the papers in my hands, a mix of anger and sadness washed over me. I knew I had to confront Laura, but I wasn't sure how. How do you even begin to address something so twisted, so fundamentally wrong? That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat Laura down and showed her the evidence. She stared at the papers, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Tom, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "There's nothing to explain, Laura. I trusted you. I trusted Mike. How could you do this to me, to our family?" Tears streamed down her face as she tried to find the words. "It just happened, Tom. We never meant for it to go this far, but we've been there for each other our whole lives. We just fell in love." "Fell in love?" I repeated, incredulous. "He's your brother, Laura. This is wrong on so many levels. How could you let this happen?" She broke down completely then, sobbing uncontrollably. "I know it's wrong. I know we've hurt you and the kids, but I can't help how I feel." I couldn't bear to look at her. The woman I had loved for so long was a stranger to me now. "I can't do this, Laura." I packed a bag and left the house, feeling a mixture of relief and despair as I drove away. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew I couldn't stay in a home built on lies. The road ahead was uncertain, and the pain was overwhelming, but I had to find a way to move forward for myself and for my children. I checked into a room and tried to sleep, but my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion, they all battled for dominance. I knew I had to stay strong for the kids, but in that moment I felt utterly broken. The next morning, I called my best friend Mark and told him everything. He listened in stunned silence, then insisted I come over. Mark had been my rock through countless ups and downs, and I needed his support now more than ever. At Mark's house, I broke down again. The reality of my situation hit me hard as I recounted the events of the past few days. Mark was furious on my behalf, but he also provided the practical advice I desperately needed. He urged me to see a lawyer and start the process of protecting myself and the kids legally and financially. With Mark's encouragement, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations, paperwork, and heart-wrenching conversations. The lawyer was sympathetic but firm. I needed to document everything, protect my assets, and prepare for a custody battle. Back at home, Laura tried to reach out to me multiple times. She left voicemails, sent text messages, and even showed up at Mark's house begging to talk. I ignored her. I couldn't face her yet. I needed time to heal, to regain some semblance of stability before confronting her again. The kids were the hardest part. Emma and Jack didn't understand why Daddy wasn't home, why Mommy was crying all the time. I tried to be there for them as much as possible, picking them up from school, taking them to the park, and ensuring they felt loved and secure despite the chaos. One evening, as I was tucking Emma into bed, she looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "Daddy, are you and Mommy going to get a divorce?" Her question hit me like a ton of bricks. I took a deep breath and tried to smile. "I don't know, sweetheart. Mommy and I are trying to figure things out. But no matter what happens, we both love you and Jack very much. That will never change." Emma hugged me tightly, and I held her, feeling the weight of my promise. I had to be strong for them, even if it meant putting my own pain aside. As the days turned into weeks, I began to rebuild my life. I moved into a small apartment, focusing on creating a stable environment for the kids. Mark and other friends rallied around me, providing support and distraction when I needed it most. Laura continued to reach out, but I maintained my distance. I needed to heal, to process everything before I could even consider talking to her. The betrayal was too fresh, the wound too deep. One afternoon, I received a letter from Laura. It was handwritten, something she hadn't done in years. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was ready to face her words. "I'm so sorry for everything. I know I've hurt you in ways that can't be undone. There's no excuse for what I've done, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to understand that I never meant to hurt you or the kids. I was lost, confused, and made terrible choices. Mike and it wasn't supposed to happen. We got too close, and lines were blurred. I know that sounds like a weak excuse, but it's the truth. I never stopped loving you, Tom. I need you to believe that. I want to make things right, but I know I can't do it alone. If there's any chance, any hope of repairing what we've broken, I want to try, for the kids and for us. But I understand if you can't. I just needed to tell you how sorry I am. Laura." I read the letter over and over, trying to make sense of my emotions. Her words were sincere, but they didn't erase the betrayal. I wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again, if we could ever go back to the way things were. One stormy night, as I was putting the kids to bed, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer it. "Hello? Tom, it's Mike. We need to talk." I felt a surge of anger. "There's nothing to talk about, Mike. Please, just listen to me. I need to explain." Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him the next day at a nearby coffee shop. I didn't want to, but a part of me needed closure, needed to hear what he had to say. The next morning, I sat at a corner table, my coffee growing cold as I waited. Mike arrived, looking as if he hadn't slept in days. He sat down across from me, his eyes filled with regret. "Tom, I'm sorry," he began. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need you to understand that I never wanted to hurt you. Laura and we got too close and it went too far." "Too far?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You had an affair with your own sister. Do you realize how sick that is?" Mike looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I know. It was wrong. I wish I could take it all back." "Why are you telling me this now?" I demanded. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I just wanted to apologize, to try to make amends in some way. Laura and I are ending it. We know it's for the best." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to punch him, to scream at him for destroying my family, but another part of me saw the broken man sitting before me, filled with remorse. As we sat in silence, the sound of a phone vibrating broke the tension. It was mine. I glanced at the screen and saw it was Laura. I hesitated, then answered. "Tom, you need to come to the hospital. It's Emma. There's been an accident." My heart dropped. "What happened?" "Just get here," she said, her voice trembling with fear. I left the coffee shop in a daze, barely registering Mike's concerned expression. The drive to the hospital was a blur, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When I arrived, I found Laura in the waiting room, pale and shaking. "Where is she?" I demanded. "She's in surgery," Laura said, tears streaming down her face. "She was hit by a car on her way home from school." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Emma, my sweet, innocent girl, was fighting for her life, and there was nothing I could do. Hours passed in agonizing silence. Laura and I sat together, holding each other, the weight of our grief temporarily erasing the chasm between us. Finally, a doctor approached, his expression grim. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I'm afraid I have some bad news. Emma didn't make it." The world seemed to stop. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Laura collapsed, wailing, and I just stood there, numb with shock. My beautiful daughter was gone, and nothing would ever be the same. The days that followed were a nightmare. We buried Emma, surrounded by family and friends, but the pain was unbearable. Laura and I were united in our grief, but it was a hollow comfort. The loss of our child was a wound that would never heal. In the midst of our sorrow, Mike disappeared. I heard from a mutual friend that he had moved away, unable to face the consequences of his actions. Part of me was relieved, but another part felt a strange emptiness. His absence was just another reminder of how broken everything had become. Laura and I struggled to find a way forward. Our shared loss bound us together, but the memories of her betrayal still lingered. We attended grief counseling, trying to cope with the unimaginable pain of losing Emma, but it was a long, hard road. One evening, as we sat in silence, Laura reached out and took my hand. "Tom, I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for, but I need you to know that I love you, and I want to try to rebuild our lives together, for Jack's sake." I looked at her, seeing the pain and remorse in her eyes. Despite everything, I knew she was sincere. We had both lost so much, and maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal together. "Let's take it one day at a time," I said, squeezing her hand. "For Jack, and for us." The path ahead was uncertain, and the pain of losing Emma would never truly fade. As the months went by, Laura and I continued our journey of reconciliation. The memory of Emma was a constant presence in our lives, but we found ways to honor her while focusing on healing our family. Our garden thrived, and the scrapbook became a cherished part of our evenings, a way to keep her spirit alive. But life, as it often does, had more challenges in store for us. One evening after Jack had gone to bed, Laura received a phone call. I watched her face pale as she listened to the person on the other end, her eyes wide with shock and fear. When she hung up, she looked at me, her expression haunted. "It's Mike," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's in the hospital. There was an accident." I felt a mix of emotions, anger, concern, and a deep-seated weariness. What happened? "He was driving late at night and lost control of his car. They said he might not make it." Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain, Mike was still family, and in that moment I knew we had to be there for him. "Let's go," I said, grabbing my keys. The drive to the hospital was tense and silent. Laura stared out the window, lost in her thoughts. When we arrived, we found Mike in the intensive care unit, surrounded by machines and tubes. The sight of him, so vulnerable and broken, stirred something in me. The doctor approached us, his expression grave. "He's in critical condition. The next 24 hours are crucial." Laura nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Can we see him?" The doctor allowed us a brief visit. As we stood by Mike's bedside, I saw a man who was a shadow of the person I once knew. Laura held his hand, whispering words of comfort while I stood back, grappling with my conflicting emotions. In the days that followed, Laura and I took turns staying at the hospital. Jack was confused and scared, but our friends and family rallied around us, providing support and reassurance. I tried to keep things as normal as possible for him, but the strain was evident. One evening, as Laura and I sat in the hospital waiting room, she turned to me, her eyes filled with guilt. "Tom, I'm so sorry for everything. If Mike doesn't make it, I don't know how I'll live with myself." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're all trying to move forward, Laura. This isn't your fault. It's just another challenge we have to face together." Laura nodded, but I could see the weight of her guilt and regret. We were all carrying heavy burdens, and it felt like the universe was testing our resolve. A week later, Mike's condition stabilized, but he remained in a coma. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but there were no guarantees. Laura and I spent as much time as we could by his side, hoping for a miracle. The loss of Emma, the betrayal, the struggle to rebuild, and now this. It felt like a never-ending series of trials, each one testing the limits of our strength and resilience. That night, as I sat by Mike's bedside, I prayed for a sign, for some kind of guidance. I didn't know if I could handle another loss. As I watched the steady rise and fall of Mike's chest, I realized that forgiveness wasn't just about absolving others, it was also about finding peace within ourselves. Weeks turned into months, and slowly Mike began to show signs of improvement. He eventually woke from his coma, weak and disoriented, but alive. The relief was overwhelming, and Laura and I clung to each other, grateful for this small mercy. As Mike started his long road to recovery, Laura and I continued to focus on healing our family. The journey was far from over, but we faced each challenge with a renewed sense of determination. We had been through so much, and yet we were still standing. One evening, as we sat together in the garden, Laura looked at me with a quiet resolve. "Tom, I know we've been through hell, but I believe we can come out of this stronger, for Jack, for Emma's memory, and for us." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "We've come this far, Laura. We can get through anything as long as we have each other." Mike's recovery was slow, but each small improvement brought a sense of hope. Laura and I continued to support him, balancing our time between the hospital and home. Jack was resilient, but we made sure to give him extra attention and love, knowing how much he needed it during this tumultuous time. The next day, Laura and I sat by Mike's hospital bed. He was awake but still weak, his eyes filled with remorse every time he looked at us. "Mike," Laura began, her voice gentle but firm, "we need to talk about everything that's happened. We can't change the past, but we can decide how to move forward from here." Mike nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. "I'm so sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you both. I've made terrible mistakes and I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I regret everything." Laura reached out, taking his hand. "We've all made mistakes, Mike. What matters now is how we move forward. We need to find a way to forgive each other and ourselves." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my words. "Mike, I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why things happened the way they did. But I do know that holding on to anger isn't helping anyone. We all need to heal, and that starts with forgiveness." Mike's tears flowed freely as he nodded. "Thank you, both of you. I promise to do whatever it takes to make things right." As the days turned into weeks, we continued to support Mike's recovery. Slowly but surely, our family began to find a new sense of normalcy. The pain of the past lingered, but we were learning to live with it, to find strength in our shared experiences. One evening, after a particularly good day, we decided to visit the garden we had planted in Emma's memory. It had become a place of solace for us, a symbol of life and growth despite the hardships we had faced. As we walked through the garden, Jack ran ahead, his laughter filling the air. Laura and I watched him, our hearts swelling with love and pride. "We've come a long way," Laura said, her voice filled with emotion. "We have," I agreed, "and we'll keep moving forward, one step at a time." As we stood there, surrounded by the beauty of the garden, I felt a sense of peace. The road to forgiveness was long and challenging, but we were on it together. Our love for each other and our commitment to healing would guide us through whatever lay ahead. That night, as we tucked Jack into bed, he looked up at us with a smile. "I think Emma would be happy," he said softly. I felt a lump in my throat as I kissed his forehead. "I think so too, buddy." Laura and I stood in the doorway watching Jack drift off to sleep. We had faced unimaginable pain and loss, but we had also found strength and resilience within ourselves and each other. Just as it felt like we were finally finding some peace, a shadow from the past re-emerged to disrupt our fragile harmony. One evening, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a stack of old letters. They were tied together with a frayed ribbon, and the top letter was addressed to Laura. Curiosity piqued. I opened the first letter. It was dated over a decade ago, from a time before Laura and I were married. As I read the words, my heart began to race. The letter was from an old boyfriend of Laura's, someone she had never mentioned before. The content was deeply personal, filled with passionate declarations of love and promises to be together forever. I continued to read, each letter revealing more about this intense relationship. It seemed they had been inseparable, and their love had been all-consuming. But something had happened to tear them apart. The last letter ended abruptly with a cryptic mention of a secret that could destroy lives. I sat back, the letters scattered around me, my mind racing with questions. Why had Laura kept these letters hidden? What was the secret mentioned in the final letter? I knew I had to talk to her, but I also feared what I might uncover. That night, after Jack was in bed, I showed the letters to Laura. Her face went pale as she saw them, and she sank into a chair, her eyes wide with shock. "Tom, where did you find these?" she asked, her voice trembling. "In the attic," I replied. "Who is he, Laura, and what happened between you two?" Laura took a deep breath, tears forming in her eyes. "His name was David. We were in love, but it was a toxic relationship. We were young and foolish, and things spiraled out of control. He wasn't a good person, Tom. There were things about him I didn't know until it was too late." "What kind of things?" I pressed, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "He was involved in some shady dealings, things that could have gotten us both into serious trouble. I broke it off when I found out, but he didn't take it well. He threatened to expose everything, to ruin my life if I didn't come back to him." "Why didn't you tell me about this?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I thought it was over," she said, wiping away tears. "I thought I had left that part of my life behind. When we got married, I wanted a fresh start. I didn't want to burden you with my past." I felt a mix of anger and compassion. "Laura, we're supposed to share everything, good and bad. You should have told me." "I know," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Tom. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you." As we sat there, trying to process the revelation, Laura's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her face turning even paler. "It's him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I took the phone from her, my heart pounding. "Hello? Tom, is that you?" a deep voice asked. "I need to talk to Laura." "This is Tom," I replied, my grip tightening on the phone. "What do you want?" There was a pause, then the voice continued. "I think it's time Laura and I settled some unfinished business." "Leave her alone," I said, anger rising in my chest. "She's moved on. We all have." "You don't understand, Tom. There's more to this than you know. If Laura doesn't meet me, I'll have no choice but to reveal everything." I ended the call, my mind racing. "We can't let him control us, Laura. We need to go to the police." Laura shook her head. "You don't understand, Tom. He has evidence. Things that could ruin us." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Financial records, emails, things that could make it look like I was involved in his schemes. It could destroy our family." I took her hands in mine, looking into her eyes. "We'll face this together, Laura. We're not letting him tear us apart. We'll figure this out." The next day, we contacted the police and a lawyer explaining the situation. They advised us to document everything and avoid meeting David alone. As we navigated this new threat, Laura and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by the challenges we faced. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, waiting for the other shoe to drop. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a man standing there, his face hidden in the shadows. "Tom, Laura, it's time we talked." It was David, and he had come to settle the score. David's unexpected arrival sent a jolt of fear and anger through me. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me to shield Laura and Jack from what was sure to be an intense confrontation. "What do you want, David?" I demanded, keeping my voice low but firm. He stepped into the light, revealing a haggard face etched with desperation. "We need to settle this, Tom. I didn't come here to cause trouble, but I need to talk to Laura." Standing my ground. "You can say whatever you need to say to me. Laura doesn't want anything to do with you." David's expression softened slightly, and he sighed. "I know I've done a lot of wrong things, and I'm not proud of it. But I've turned my life around. I came to make amends and clear the air. I was skeptical. Why now? Why after all this time? Because I've changed, he insisted, and I want to set things right before it's too late. Look, I brought proof. He handed me an envelope. These are documents showing my involvement in the shady deals. Laura had nothing to do with it. I want to clear her name. I took the envelope, my mind racing. And why should we trust you? David looked down, his voice trembling. I don't expect you to trust me right away. But I'm trying to make things right. I've been in therapy, I've paid my dues, and I want to apologize to Laura in person. Please, Tom, let me talk to her. Against my better judgment, I decided to give him a chance. Wait here. I went back inside and found Laura in the living room, her face pale with worry. David's here, I said softly. He says he wants to make amends and clear your name. He has documents to prove it. Laura's eyes widened. Tom, I'm scared. What if he's lying? I don't think he is, I replied. But it's up to you. Do you want to talk to him? Laura took a deep breath and nodded. I need to face this. I need closure. We stepped outside together and Laura stood before David, her expression a mixture of anger and sorrow. David, what are you doing here? David's shoulders sagged as he met her gaze. Laura, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I ruined your life and I've regretted it every day. I've been working to change, to be a better person. I came to clear your name and ask for your forgiveness. Laura's eyes filled with tears. You hurt me so much, David. You put my family at risk. How can I ever forgive you? David nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm here to take responsibility for my actions and give you the closure you need. I've brought proof of my wrongdoing. Laura looked at the envelope in my hand, then back at David. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, but I appreciate that you're trying to make things right. David nodded. That's all I can ask for. I'm truly sorry, Laura. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past pressing down on us. Finally, Laura spoke. Thank you for coming forward, David. I hope you continue to change for the better. David gave a small, sad smile. I will. Thank you for giving me a chance to make amends. With that, David turned and walked away, leaving us standing on the porch, a sense of relief washing over us. The shadows of the past had been confronted, and while the scars remained, we could finally begin to heal. Laura and I went back inside, and I handed her the envelope. She opened it and read through the documents, her expression softening as she realized the extent of David's confession. This is it, she said, her voice filled with a mix of emotions. This proves I had nothing to do with his schemes. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. We can move forward now, Laura. We've faced our demons and we've come out stronger. She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. Thank you, Tom, for standing by me, for believing in me. We're in this together, I whispered, always.